show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
Welcome to the Nomiki Show. It is Friday, February 11th, and the talk of the town right now is this term called inflation. I'm sure you've heard a lot about it on our show. You've read about it. Anywhere you look, what is Biden doing about this inflation? But you've also probably heard about this trucker situation happening. It started in Canada, a trucker protest, a small group of truckers, let's be very clear, but trucks are big. So it might look like it's a lot more and they might get a lot of media attention. Of course, the media loves this stuff. The media is talking about, oh no, the truckers are now coming to the US. The truckers are descending on the US. They're at the border. They're holding up shipments at the border. But they might go to the Super Bowl. They might protest the State of the Union. What are we going to do? These are truckers, of course, who are angry at the mandates, about the vaccination mandates. You know, vaccinations that, of course, make them healthier and safer to drive. But is this really about the mandates? Is this really about, these protests? Is this really even about Biden? Of course not. The right wing has been so skillful at political jiu-jitsu for decades. It is, they know very well that they are the party of the elites. You don't have to be told that. And they will do whatever it takes to create division. They will do whatever it takes to tap into cultural trends, whether it's CRT, which is really about school boards, which is really about teachers' unions, which are the largest funders of the Democratic Party, largest public service employees as well. It's never about what they say it is. We know that. But this has taken a whole other level. The insurrection went too far. And if the Democrats were smart, if Biden were smart in these midterms, they would literally just associate every single Republican, anti-Trump or not, with the insurrectionists, because the RNC has politically endorsed the insurrectionists at this point, saying it's just political discourse. Of course it wasn't. People were murdered. It was terrorism. It wasn't a riot. It was terrorism. And if Democrats are smart, they would use this moment to remind folks that even the Republicans who may not be Trumpsters but still associate with the RNC are part of that tribe. This is the moment for that. But what are the Republicans doing? What is the far right doing? What is the Bannon movement doing? They know that is what Democrats, if they were smart, are going to tap into. Because you even pull away the most reasonable Republicans because they don't want to be affiliated. We're talking about voters with the insurrectionists. Mitch McConnell knows that. He denounced them. He wants to keep the Senate. He wants his power. He wants to win the Senate, I should say. So what is Bannon doing? He realizes that right now there's a moment of instability, economic instability. They've done everything they can to pull a few people from this movement, pull a few people from that movement, tap into anger over here, tap into moms who are angry or just were taught to be angry about history class. They do this all over the country. They tap into different groups, 2% here, 1% there, 0.5% there, keep those folks down so that they don't vote, attack the Democratic Party for being elitists. They're attacking Joe Biden because of inflation. Finally, reporters are recognizing that, inflation doesn't actually have to do with everything the Republicans have said. It's not really a Biden thing, although he could do some things about it. Turns out many CEOs around this country that have churned, their companies that have churned record profits, whether it's Exxon, whether it's McDonald's, whether it's Starbucks. These are companies that have shown record profits. And they are increasing the prices of their goods, not because of supply chain issues, but because they're choosing to make more money. Meanwhile, they're sticking it to their workers, which is why you're seeing people organizing in Starbucks all over the country. I think we're at 74 unions now, Starbucks locations trying to unionize, which is why you're seeing protests and strikes at John Deere, at Kellogg's, which is why you're seeing Amazon workers, of course, organize, because it just doesn't make sense. What does that have to do with the truckers? The truckers are part of the supply chain. So Let's disrupt the supply chain a little bit more. Even if that's not the cause, let's just do it a little bit more. And reports are saying it might, because they're trying to create a movement of truckers who, let's remind you all, long haul truckers spend over 300 days on a road, average, a year. Right-wing radio is basically wired right into their channels. They're listening to right-wing radio. They're listening to what's happening. They're almost overwhelmingly conservative. And guess what? They're really upset about these mandates. They're upset about government. But are they really? Or are they really upset about the conditions that they're working under? And this is what the Republicans are doing so well. They're channeling that economic frustration of certain groups that they know that they can mobilize because they're already tapped into Republican rhetoric. They're channeling that into attacking the Democrats, anti-mandates. Oh, inflation's going up because Biden's not dealing with it, rather than CEOs are increasing the prices of their goods, or shippers are increasing the prices, or oil is increasing the prices so that it's more expensive. Or now truckers who may not even know that they're part of this are actually disrupting the supply chain by protesting vaccination mandates. These things are interwoven. It is political jiu-jitsu. They're using an economic moment and channeling it away from worker organizing and into anger at the government for vaccination mandates or mask mandates. Anger at Joe Biden for not dealing with the inflation that they are creating. You see how that works? Now, Joe Biden can do something about this because his economy's stupid. It's always the economy's stupid when it comes down to elections. He can do something about this. Price gouging is illegal. The laws around price gouging can be strengthened. It is something that previous presidents have been able to do unilaterally. He can do something. I know that they want the pandemic to end, partly because people just want business to go back to usual. But I think that there are some very greedy conservative CEOs in this country who, let's not forget, are donating to Republicans who love stretching out this pandemic and using supply chain as the issue so they can increase costs of goods, so they can make sure people order from their companies, so they can make more money as CEOs than ever before and keep their workers down. Of course, they love it. So Democrats do want this pandemic to end. They do want people to get their vaccines. But I also think they're reaching the point where they're fed up, which is why Kathy Hochul, I believe, removed the mask mandate. There comes a point where certain people are just never going to get the vaccine, partly because of this. So this is, as we go into the election, this is what they're doing. It is not about the supply chain. And even if it is slightly by looking at the truckers, it is about the conditions of the working class. And unless we have strong unions, which obviously people are organizing around this country and channeling that energy in the right way, the Republicans are going to try to divert as much energy away from labor and into cultural issues, into mandates, into anti-imperialist pipelines that just criticize the U.S. government, which deserves it at times, but not other governments, which makes it about Joe Rogan being canceled rather than Joe Rogan being a pipeline for radicalization. You know, Joe Rogan had Bernie Sanders on, got Bernie Sanders' audience, some of it, which was rightfully so dissatisfied with the way government was responding to their needs. And Bernie Sanders offered solutions. But once Bernie Sanders was no longer running, people are looking for an outlet. The algorithm's already geared towards young males. And that is Joe Rogan's audience. So he has on a few leftists to talk about how bad the Democratic Party is, how bad government is, the US government is. And then simultaneously has people on like Jordan Peterson and then Alex Jones. And the next thing you know, a certain percentage of this country is being radicalized. And all you need is a few percent there, a few percent there, a few percent there to either stay home or vote Republican. And you lose Congress, you lose the Senate, and you possibly lose the presidency. And then I ask you, what comes after that? All right, we have a wonderful show today. We're going to be talking a lot about the economy today. We have Grace Blakely on a little bit later. She's going to talk about what's happening with specifically with these interest rates and what it's really about. And then after that, we talk to Indigo Oliver, who discusses how right now, I don't know if you know, employers can cut off your healthcare if you strike. There's a new bill that would block that from happening. We talk about that with her. And then after that, we talk to Jamie Peck about some of the news of the day. It's a crazy, crazy, crazy time. So gear up. This is Femme Friday. See you in a second. Hello. Oh my God, I've been traveling. Like the last few days have been horrible for me in terms of traveling. Every type of delay at an airport and not missed flights, canceled flights and having to go back home and get up early in the morning, all 6 a.m. flights. You know how that feels. So basically I was sleep deprived for the last week. And I don't know if you guys ever get this, like you drink too much coffee because you're sleep deprived. And then you wake up in the middle of the night and your like body's like twitching basically. Well, that's actually happened to me a few times this week where I guess it's restless leg syndrome, or I don't know what it is, what causes it, but it's definitely due to sleep deprivation. But I'm really grateful that I have discovered Sunset Lake CBD because it helps me sleep through the night. Last night in the middle of the night, I was like, I am so tired. Why can't I stop tossing and turning? And I grabbed there it is right there, the Sunset Lake CBD oil with melatonin now. I have that next to my bed. I took a few drops and I slept the rest of the night. Deep, deep, deep sleep. The most delicious dreams. You know that feeling. Sunset Lake CBD is a farmer-owned company based in Vermont. They took an old Ben & Jerry's farm and then diversified it and shifted it over to craft CBD. They grow premium hemp. They are a great company that offers their minimum wage is $15 an hour. They're also employees own the majority of their company, and they support independent media like our show, the Nomiki Show, the David Pakman Show, and the Majority Report. They've got all sorts of products that help with your aches and pains, whether it's the tincture, which helps me with my sleep and my aches and pains, or they've got chocolate, they've got lotions for when your joints are sore, or I have a hand issue, I put it on my hand all the time. All sorts of different products. My family swears by it. I hope they're putting in Nomi because they get a discount, but I don't know if they are. But if you want a discount, you should go to sunsetlakecbd.com and type in Nomi, N-O-M-I, and you will get 20% off of your entire order. Definitely check out the gummies too. I got to say, that's what started me on this. It's dangerous, but I see them on screen right now. It's definitely worth it. Just take a few at once. Don't eat the whole bottle like I almost did one time. Go to sunsetlakecbd.com, type in Nomi, N-O-M-I, and you will get 20% off of your entire order for sunsetlakecbd.com. We will be right back with Jane Peck. Our next guest is Grace Blakely. Grace Blakely is a staff writer for Tribune and the author of Stolen: How to Save the World from Financialization. Great question. Also has recent pieces out in Jacobin, of course. One titled Raising Interest Rates is about screwing workers, and the other, Billionaires Absurd and Growing Wealth Undercuts Democracy. Here, Grace. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's great to finally be able to join you.
I know. We've tried many times, and the universe has like lots of other things in store for us. So this inflation issue is unbelievable. We opened the show. I had a conversation, talked about how inflation is being used as a weapon, and simultaneously the weaponization of supply chain issues are used as a weapon for political divides and organizing and splinters. Tell us a little bit, what's behind this quote unquote inflation conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. That piece that I had in Jacobin in the US, it was entitled Raising Interest Rates as a Way to Screw Workers. And in the UK, it was entitled Is a Form of Class War.
Oh, interesting.
I think that was a kind of interesting little difference there between like the US and the UK context. But I mean, basically, that is what it is. If you go back to the period during which this narrative that we're seeing being rolled out again was formed, it was the 1970s and 80s, when you had this argument being kind of trotted out by what was then seen as kind of very radical element of the right, what we now know as the kind of neoliberal movement. And their argument was that inflation, this is Milton Friedman saying, is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Now, what was going on in the 1970s was that there was a dramatic spike in inflation, and that was driven by the formation of OPEC. That's that group of oil producing countries that got together, formed this group and said, we're going to control oil prices, basically. So you had two big spikes in oil prices in the early 1970s, and that drove up inflation for everything, because what are we learning now? What we known for a very long time, it's that energy prices, and particularly oil prices, feed into the prices of so many other things. Now, that's particularly true for oil because it's used to make so many different things. Like oil is not just the fuel you put in your cars. It's also hydrocarbons in plastics. It's natural gas used for fertilizer. So fossil fuels are used across our economy. And also bear in mind that they're really important when we're thinking about global logistics and transportation, and that our economies, the UK and also the US, very, very dependent on imports. So all of that means that energy prices, particularly fossil fuel prices, feed into inflation. This happened in the 1970s, and that very radical right-wing movement said, this is because of unions. This is because workers are demanding too higher wages. And at that time, we had in the UK and to a lesser extent in the US, relatively strong labor movements that could really kind of bring the economy to a grinding halt if they demanded wage increases that the bosses didn't want to give. So this was really seen as a kind of wedge to basically divide public opinion and bash the labor movement. And it worked basically because a lot of the tools that had previously been used to combat inflation during the post-war period stopped working when you had this big change in energy prices. And really the result of that, in part, it was a significant part of why we got the neoliberal revolution, was to do with all these crises around how do you deal with inflation, and also the kind of general sense that the labor movement had gotten out of control. Here we are today, and the right is once again, even after a decade of wage stagnation in the UK, even after in the US, the average worker before the pandemic was as well off in purchasing power parity terms as they were in the 1970s. Even after all of that wage stagnation, they're trying to roll this argument out again. And that's why it's class war.
Well, and it's interesting. It is class war, but I love that in the American version, they say it's about screwing workers. And I want to highlight screwing workers because I think that the right wing, which I opened with on the show, the right wing understands that they have a problem in that they're trying to appear populist. Simultaneously, there's this labor movement that's growing. It is nowhere where it needs to be because of the failures of the last 40 years of the Democratic Party, siding with neoliberals and basically kicking out labor from the party while bringing in lobbyists who are union busters, in some cases lawyers who are union busters in the Democratic Party, all around the late 1970s when you were talking about this period. So these things all happened at the same time. But they know that they need, or at least the Steve Bannons of the world who are organizing this type of Republican Party, know that they need to have a robust populist movement that is disruptive enough and votes enough in specific districts, because it's all gerrymandered in the United States, that it's almost like death by a thousand cuts. They just need enough. And when I see the truckers in Canada, which of course now there's threats that they're going to be coming here for Super Bowl, they're going to be I was just actually at the Canadian border yesterday in outside of Buffalo and Niagara Falls, and we decided not to go across to Canada because of the truckers who were protesting at the border. And it's very fascinating because truckers are traditionally more conservative. They listen to conservative talk radio on these long haul routes, for several hours. They're on the road like 350 days a year or something like a little over 300 days a year. They're listening to conservative talk radio. But there's an intersection between supply chain, which is, people are saying is the excuse for inflation, and workers' rights and mandates, and all of these things are intersecting. So the worker aspect, to me, this is if the workers are frustrated, the Republican Party, the right wing, has found a way for what is horrible conditions for these truckers to channel into mandates, and then channeling the economy, using the economic situation to create a little mini movement, and then continue to blame the Democrats for inflation and the economy in an election year. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think what you've kind of put your finger on there is a problem that progressive, the left have had for a long time, which is that we tend to assume that any form of economic crisis that tends to squeeze workers will benefit the left. And that is just not true. It's not true today. It wasn't true after the financial crisis. And the reason for that is that the response to any crisis, the response to any kind of, crisis in living standards, financial crisis, whatever, the way that people make sense of that and the way that they respond to that will depend, to a great extent on the ideas that are, again, in the words of Milton Friedman, lying around at the time. The left, up until a few years after the financial crisis, did not have a strong populist narrative that was able to explain why people's living standards were falling in a way that people could relate to. The right had a very easy, very powerful, and very potent narrative. It was some sort of mix between the left, the center left has spent too much money. It's out of control, government spending. That's the reason for this problem. That's the reason for the financial crisis. And also, they've been letting in loads of immigrants, and those are the people who are stealing your jobs, using public services, using your healthcare. And without a powerful counter narrative to explain falling living standards in another way, that was what people immediately and initially latched onto. What you saw, years after the financial crisis, when we'd had the chance to build up a more powerful movement, Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, Bernie Sanders, Podemos, Syriza, all of these new movements that emerged all around the world, very much on the left, very much from a socialist perspective, said actually, no, the reason that you are doing badly is because all of the benefits of growth are being captured by an elite at the very top of our society. The same elite that caused the financial crisis, the same elite that imposed austerity, the same elite that has, been implicated in causing the climate crisis. All of these crises that we're dealing with today have been caused by basically a small number of people at the very top of society who are in control of our big corporations, our big banks, and the revolving door that exists between those institutions and the government. And that narrative was very powerful and very popular, but for a number of reasons, which we probably don't have time to go into today, it wasn't the one that ended up sticking. Yet, I think today, the right is aware that there is some kind of latent enthusiasm for this way of explaining things, particularly when, we've seen over the course of the last couple of years during the pandemic, billionaire wealth skyrocket.
Right.
A few people do extremely well, while others were made to, again, bear the costs of this crisis. So as you say, they have to kind of find all these little ways of cutting up that potential coalition, because that's what they're really trying to do. They are really trying to undermine class solidarity. Bernie actually had a great quote, which was something along the lines of, if there's going to be a class war in this country, it's about time the working classes won it, which I think really gets that point. There's much class solidarity among this elite, and it's their job really to keep working people disorganized and not having that kind of coherent narrative.
That's right. And it's almost like political jiu-jitsu, right? They're taking an energy that exists and channeling it into something, which is what, Trump did so well. It's the Mexicans' fault. It's not, your employer's fault. The good news is that a lot of people are waking up to that's just BS. The bad news is that's not how electoral politics works in this country. You just need enough votes, not all of the votes or a majority of the votes. You just need enough in a coalition. I want to end with one question. I know we don't have a lot of time today, but love to have you on again because this is
I would love to come back.
Big conversation, super fascinating.
The smart win about
yes.
socialism.
Yes, it's my favorite. But the other aspect of this is, and it again goes back to the late 70s when a lot of these free trade agreements took hold. And I think about it every single time I hear about the supply chain is, we're obviously Western, Northern capitalist countries that are consumer-based economies. Our economy is entirely consumer-based as much as they want to manipulate it in different ways. And free trade and the supply chain all intersect here and this all kind of came about at the same time when labor, of course, was attacked. And in 2016, during the presidential race, this was a big dividing line between the Clinton coalition and the Bernie coalition. Was you had some more progressive labor unions and membership, even if their leaders did not endorse Bernie Sanders. The membership recognized that the free trade agreements of the late 70s and, of course, mid 90s, early 90s made a huge difference in how strong labor is in this country. Well, now we're seeing, if we haven't seen the last 2 years during the shutdowns, we're seeing it immediately. So, they're blaming, the elites are blaming, the CEOs are blaming the supply chain, which is their economic model, by the way, but they're also increasing the costs while they're making record profits. So which is it? Is this a dilemma for them, or is this an opportunity for us to say, no matter who you blame, you're at fault?
Yeah, obviously a big part of why we experience such kind of economic turmoil when different parts of the global economy shut down at different times was because of the just extraordinary interconnectedness of the world economy. Mm-hmm. And even, the virus itself spread through supply, through kind of trading routes from kind of city to city and then out from there. So, these kind of the classic thing to say at the beginning of the pandemic was we are all going to be affected by this because of the way that, these just-in-time supply chains work. Businesses are keeping less inventory. They're relying on shipments coming in very, very quickly to translate those inputs into the products that they're producing. Another really interesting part of this is actually the way that global shipping has changed.
Right.
You've got these huge container ships that have to be very carefully organized when they're going in from one port out of another port. They take days and days to unload. A load of those ships just ended up basically floating around the ocean or just docked somewhere with all the workers trapped on board.
Can I just add something to this? I flew in yesterday, as I mentioned, into New York City, and we were going into JFK, and it was at nighttime, and I saw these ships, and I was like, what are they doing? They're just sitting. And of course, all these things were going in my mind. There were dozens of them. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just saw that last night.
Actually, I personally just am very, very interested in shipping just as like a thing because it's a fascinating thing. Containerization is one of these really not spoken about things that just transformed the global economy. And if you look at what's happened to global shipping over the course of the last couple of years, A, it's been massively disrupted, but B, the working conditions for some of these workers who are often sailing on these boats, which are, on the seas under flags of convenience, which basically means, they are using the labor laws of countries with the worst kind of labor laws that you can imagine. Some of them have literally been trapped on boats for years, unable to get off because they weren't able to kind of get off at the ports because the countries wouldn't let them in.
Wow.
It's really horrendous conditions, and what were already very difficult conditions for these workers. So, that whole model has been really pushed to breaking point, and we're going to continue to see this, I think, because, a kind of system as intricate and complex as global logistics can't just be shut down and then resurrected as it was before. We're really going to have to rethink how a lot of this stuff works. So supply chain issues are a massive thing, are going to continue to be a massive thing. And that coordination, which allows, chip manufacturers in Southeast Asia to coordinate with manufacturers in another part of Asia, to coordinate with consumers and managers in different parts of the world, that's all going to take a very long time really to reconstruct, to make it work again in any meaningful way. But the other thing, I think, when we talk about supply chains, we're maybe not we could overemphasize that as actually one of the big causes of inflation, because if you really drill down into the data and you look at what's actually causing inflation, what the consumer is feeling, it is energy prices. And this really, I think, does give us a bit of a wake-up call. It's that we need to come up with a more sustainable, cheaper source of energy that can last us into the future, and also kind of allow us to decarbonize. Because oil prices sunk to zero during the pandemic. Everyone was like, great, it's the end of big oil. Of course, they immediately rebounded when economic growth started again. And now we're seeing this massive uptick, which is all benefiting the big oil companies. Exxon had its most profitable year in 7 years. All the big oil companies are having bumper profits. They're distributing it to shareholders. They're largely not using it to try and decarbonize as they promised they would. We really need to just get these companies out of our economy and start transitioning towards renewables.
You can't just put a sweater on, as Jimmy Carter said. Even though my heating company, my power company, emailed me today saying, we know that rates are higher than normal, as I'm wearing a sweater. My goodness, just stop consuming. I think that's the alternative. Maybe Joe Biden should say, guys, maybe you don't order everything off of Amazon every 5 seconds. I'm just kidding. It would be nice if you actually cracked down on these companies. Grace, super insightful, rapid round conversation. Thank you for joining us. Let's have you on again very soon. And have a great night. I know you're out in the UK right now. So
thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
We will be right back after this quick little break. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Indigo Oliver is a journalist who's written for pieces for The Guardian, The Nation, Jacobin, The Conversationalist, and right now has a piece out in these times titled "A Landmark Bill Would Outlaw Bosses Cutting Off Healthcare to Striking Workers." My goodness, just another reminder that our labor laws are extraordinarily weak in this country, and there's very little oversight. Indigo, thank you for joining us and for writing this piece.
Thank you for having me.
So I guess we should start off with what are they allowed to do when workers strike? And are these legal strikes, or are these like the illegal strikes that occur with like teachers unions and public sector workers?
Well, what I was talking about mostly was legal strikes. But when you do go on strike, what happens is your pay gets cut off. That's pretty standard practice. And in certain cases, employers have the option to cut your health care off as well. And it's been used as a threat, and was recently used as a threat at the recent John Deere strike. It is completely legal for them to do so. In certain cases, unions like the UAW, which are much larger, have strike funds. So they will support their workers through like small weekly payments, and then will also in some cases cover their healthcare through COBRA benefits. But I think this is really a game changer, just because it takes away one of these key strike breaking tactics that we've seen companies use in recent years, or in decades really, but especially over the last couple of years.
So the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, is falls under the Biden administration, and of course was weakened under Trump. And I know a lot of the Biden administration hasn't really fully empowered the NLRB in many ways. Even in the last year, but the PRO Act, for instance, is this bill that is sort of like MIA right now, I guess. I don't know if you have the latest on the PRO Act, but it could obviously strengthen the NLRB and labor laws for striking. Is this a bill that could be passed um, in case the PRO Act doesn't get passed, or it gets broken up into pieces, or it just takes several years, while conditions are obviously very not great right now in the country?
So I think this is something that we should look at as additional legislation to strengthen worker organizing alongside the PRO Act. The question of how likely it is to pass along with the PRO Act is kind of like a separate story. And I don't think Democrats have really done enough to push for the legislation that they want to see and kind of like strategically negotiate with people like Joe Manchin and Sinema. But yeah, I think this is definitely one piece in a puzzle to strengthen labor overall. The one thing that I would say, though, is that we shouldn't rely on the NLRB too much to strengthen labor as a whole. I think the only way that we're really, really going to see that in a big way is if masses of organizers organize at the grassroots level and kind of demand the things that they're owed, like healthcare and the right to collectively bargain.
I've heard from Starbucks workers who I was in Buffalo this past weekend, as I mentioned in the previous segment, and learned that they would hit a lot of roadblocks and have a lot of issues in terms of strengthening their organizing, and they've been very successful, partly due to the kind of conditions and the size of a store and how these union efforts have spread so fast. It's not striking, but it's organizing. But they have said, like, if the PRO Act was passed, this would be much, much easier. I'm curious, like, have you interviewed any of the congressional members who co-sponsored this bill, or do you know sort of what their mentality is behind why this bill now, and are they preparing for a fight with the PRO Act?
Yeah, so there's an interesting story behind the bill. The key person who introduced the legislation, Sydney Axne, Representative Sydney Axne, a Democrat in the House, actually oversees the district where a number of the John Deere striking workers were living in. So her constituents were going through this. Again, John Deere threatened to cut their health care off. And when she heard from her constituents, she was inspired to introduce this legislation. And she started having conversations with some of her colleagues on the Hill and heard that they had also had constituents facing similar issues in recent years. Another one of the co-sponsors oversaw the district where the Kellogg's striking workers, part of the Kellogg's workers were striking. About 1,400 Kellogg's workers lost their health care during the course of that strike. So that was a big issue. So in terms of a strike, in terms of a fight, I'm not entirely sure. I was able to get some answers from Representative Axne through email. Mm-hmm. And when I asked her about how likely she thinks the bill is to pass, her answer was sort of, well, with any legislation, introduction is the first step. So I think Democrats are pretty aware that this is going to be an uphill battle, as it has been, especially with holdouts like Manchin and Sinema.
What I don't understand is, how is this even legal? I mean, there is isn't there a mandate for employers to provide health care if an employee is working? I mean, it's not, you don't know how long the strike is going to be. It could be, a week, 2 weeks, a month, but I assume, especially the Kellogg's workers and the John Deere workers, these are employees. I assume they're not at will employees. They're on salary. So how do they get away with this?
I mean, we have a system of labor laws, really business laws in this country that favor the employer. So again, like I said, when you're on strike, you don't get paid. And I think that kind of in the employer's mind, pay is linked to healthcare. So it's like, if you're not working, you're not going to get the pay or the benefits that we're giving you. Again, not every employer cuts healthcare during a strike. It is specifically used as a strike-breaking tactic when they know it's going to be a struggle with workers and want them to get them to the negotiating table and to just accept a contract and move on. But I think really it points to a larger issue in this country, which is employer-based healthcare. If we did not have an employer-based healthcare system in this country, overnight workers would already be in a better position to negotiate over things that have nothing to do with healthcare, just because they wouldn't have that threat looming over them. I also wanted to mention that, during Striketober, again, John Deere and Kellogg's workers were among some of the bigger striking groups. But during that time, healthcare was actually a huge issue that was being negotiated over at the contract table. Again, like John Deere, for instance, one of their big issues that they were negotiating over was higher premiums. They wanted to raise workers' cost of their premiums to 20%, which was a huge hike. A lot of workers have been complaining about just poor coverage overall. And UAW retirees in more recent years have also lost retiree health and benefits. So once you retire, you're no longer you no longer have health insurance.
Well, I mean, what's also crazy about this is you would think it's in the employer's interest to fight for something like Medicare for all, because it makes your workers less likely to be dissatisfied with the company. If the limited wages, which are already cutting, are not going to just like survival. So, never made sense to me at all. I never understood why big business didn't say Medicare for all is great for business. It's great for everybody. I think it's a bit of a catch-22 because, again, healthcare is a huge cost to employers, especially for large corporations. It's a huge cost. On the other hand, if they wanted to have a Medicare for all system, they know that they would have to pay more in taxes. And it also kind of just goes back to this ideological issue where even if we are spending more than twice the normal OECD country in healthcare costs because we have private health insurance, it's too close to socialism for people to really get behind. Interesting. So in terms of next steps for this bill, where does it go?
So it was recently introduced in the House. That was February 2nd. Representative Axnay is confident that it should be introduced in the Senate pretty soon. I'm not really sure where it's going to go. Honestly, not many people have covered it. I haven't heard a lot about it outside of like press releases and statements from unions. There have been a number of unions that have endorsed the bill. So the UAW, the AFL-CIO, the United Mine Workers, and a number of others have come behind this legislation. So I think we're probably going to see some cooperation between labor and representatives, and hopefully, rank and file members will be trying to support this in grassroots ways as well.
Oh my God. It's good to see the organizing. It's good to see some members, but obviously Washington's at a standstill right now. Really interesting conversation. Go check out this article and in these times right now. It appeared on February 4th. Indigo Oliver authored a landmark bill would outlaw bosses cutting off healthcare to striking workers. Hopefully many, many bills like this in conjunction with the PRO Act, which hopefully will get a little bit more attention soon. Indigo Oliver, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we will be right back with Jamie Peck. am very excited. Our next guest is Alexander Reed Ross. He is an adjunct lecturer at Portland State University, and he is the author of the book Against the Fascist Creep. I can't say fascist creep. And he is he's sporting his Joe Rogan look today. What did you plan that?
I just wanted to apologize for the bad thing that I'll never repeat again.
Apology not accepted, but we will pretend that it didn't happen and say we're not censoring you, okay? Oh man, yes. Who wore it better? I think you wore it better because there's books in the background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the point of the bookshelf. I was trying to explain this to Joe before he cribbed my style, but he wouldn't listen.
The point of the bookshelf. So, all right. Okay, last time you were on, we noticed a little thing happening online where folks, it's been going on for about a couple months, folks who had once said that they were like on the left were suddenly like leading other well-meaning leftists into a direction of failure, to dead ends, attacking leftist leaders for not being leftist enough in Congress. I'm not even going to say the term that they were using, but then it kind of failed, and then it turned into another thing, and then another thing, and but the first hints of this were not with the force the you-know-what in Congress movement. They started much earlier, and I was very grateful to discover your work, and you broke it down for me. And it was like, I can't unlearn this. Now I see everything through the lens of the grand scheme of the great Steve Bannon and his best friends. So tell us, how does this whole ecosystem work? Just like that.
Well, like the thing is that Bannon was really the guy who was kind of cultivating the alt-right into the mainstream Republican Party using the Breitbart Forum. And this was really a turning point for the Republicans, which ushered in the kind of paleo-conservative Pat Buchanan populist wing, the so-called like pitchfork wing of the Republican Party, and ushered out the more kind of neoliberal trend that we'd seen in the Republican Party since really Reagan. And with Bannon really comes all this populism, right? So he'll appropriate all the economic criticisms that you'll see on the left of, inflation, real wages, the plight of the middle class, or the plight of the working class, he'll say, and then he'll direct it towards a nationalist policy in terms of economics and politics, international relations, foreign policy, and so forth. So that's kind of how his game works, and it does kind of draw from a long line of radical right politics that tends to dip into the fascist movement in order to provide cannon fodder for the sorts of private interests that he represents.
So there's this article that came out in the New York Times yesterday, and I sent it to everybody I knew, and I feel like it didn't get enough attention from anybody. And it was this piece that, and sometimes this happens in the New York Times, like where something really big comes out and no one really notices it, and then like 2 years later, some documentarian references it. It was an inspiration behind a documentary, but it took that long for it to turn into something. Eric Prince, who is like literally Dr. Evil. I mean, he is. I don't know what he drank as a child, because obviously it was something that happened in the home, because his sister is Betsy DeVos, of course. But right. Eric Prince helped raise money for a conservative spy venture to essentially infiltrate different groups, including leftist groups, including even center left Democratic parties. There was a donor aspect of this. It's been reported on in the past, but I immediately thought of kind of what's been going on in the left in diverting attention away from real movement work and labor work, and discrediting leftists who are trying to push people towards movement labor work, and discrediting them with attacks like you're a whatever, like there's always an attack for something. Is this part of that, or is this sort of a different thing when you read this piece?
I mean, it has a lot of fascinating kind of aspects to it, especially the fact that this has been going on for something like 5 years. You know, the person who he's sort of promoting with this is a former MI6 agent who has been infiltrating American Federation of Teachers in Michigan, you know, Democratic campaigns on the small scale. So he's really been at this for a while. And also the involvement of Project Veritas is
Right.
sort of the crucial link here between Prince, this MI6 guy that he's promoting, and their efforts to run kind of stings against left-wing organizations, to infiltrate them, right? And so what we see here is a real counterintelligence strategy that, in a sense, is sort of privatized along with a lot of the military industry. So yeah, it seems to be a kind of dirty tricks operation that relies on millions of dollars in funding from people, including the Gore-Tex heiress mentioned in that piece about
Susan
Wyoming.
Gore,
Yeah, as well as Project Veritas's own war chest of millions of dollars from apparently anonymous sources.
Yeah, anonymous sources. Interesting. So let's go back to Bannon, because can you help us understand, like, Bannon is working internationally and locally. Who are his web of folks, and simultaneously, how does that overlap with this anti-vax movement? Because there are populists around the world who are uniting around anti-vax, anti-COVID, anti-government response to COVID.
Yeah, so exactly. The crowd that Bannon keeps is really fascinating. I mean, he recently had episodes of his podcast War Room hosted by Jack Posobiec, for example, who used to go with the alt-right title before he changed his sort of tactics. There's obviously former Trump advisors like Peter Navarro. There are anti-vaxxers and white nationalists associated with the anti-immigration Tantan Network, you know, Numbers USA, and those types of organizations. And, you know, he kind of forms this node for all things populist and nationalist in a sense. So he develops real double binds wherever he goes, such that his enemies can't maneuver and he has all the freedom. And the perfect example of this is probably the COVID issue, because he continually presses. He says lying Democratic senators are lying about how the COVID pandemic is almost over. He's like, it's just begun. But then again, he's also fighting vaccines and he's fighting mask mandates. He's supporting the trucker convoy. Yeah, because he wants to really, he hates the Chinese Communist Party. And he wants to blame the Chinese Communist Party for the COVID pandemic, right? Because he has a particularly kind of a racist way of doing this. And he wants to stress the dangers of the pandemic while at the same time accusing the Democrats of ushering in a military dictatorship. And I think you find this a lot with these kinds of figures on the far right, and that's why it's so wild that he is such a public figure, is that they live in these fantasies of their own, you know, creation, where they're the protagonists fighting against the world. And so for Steve Bannon, he very much is this underground revolutionary figure who's fighting off a Democratic Party military dictatorship system and attempting to liberate the working class. I don't think that he's necessarily false in his belief in that situation, but he is clearly a delusional man.
So he has done work in Europe. He had that monastery where he was trying to recruit, or I guess he did, to sway the EU elections. He was part of the Brexit, the campaign for Brexit with Nigel Farage, I can never say his name right.
He who
And
must
then,
not be named.
and then of course, he just kept going, right? So the EU experiment wasn't successful, but it didn't mean that like the far right that wasn't planting the seeds for more far right leaders to grow in power. Previously, you told us about how he had links to somebody who's very close, or at least at one point was very close with Putin. I'm curious a little bit more about that, Dugan, and I'm also curious about how Putin's new pact with China intersects with Bannon, because Bannon being so anti China, how does this play into his political strategy at all?
It doesn't, but it does. I mean, he's a very opportunistic guy, so he's always trying to exploit, weaknesses in his enemy. That's the main point. The point for Bannon is attack. It's not have a, coherent position on anything. So with regards to China, I mean, Dugin teaches now, Alexander Dugin, an old traditionalist kind of Russian fascist guy. So he has, by this point, years of links with China. He taught at a Chinese university for a while. I think he still does. And he wants to see this Eurasian landmass from Dublin to Vladivostok kind of develop out of discrete ethno-states based on authoritarian patriarchal forms, whether they be kind of Iranian theocracy or whether they be a more kind of clearly ideologically pure fascist structure. But for Bannon, since he hates China so much, he wants, and his whole sort of foreign policy revolves around great power competitions in order to win Russia over to the side of the United States and combat Chinese influence internationally. He can simply say that the recent sort of formation of deeper security ties between Russia and China is all Biden's fault, and that basically Biden has weakened the United States economy to the point where Putin is now forced to want to kind of be friends with Xi Jinping because, America is no longer an option. It's basically a dying country, right? So he thinks for him, this is the nightmare situation, the worst thing that could possibly happen. And it's all the Democrats' fault. So if you got somebody like Trump back into power, the United States would regain its swagger and would be able to win Russia back against Ukraine.
Aha. Okay, so let's talk about Ukraine.
Oh, sorry. I meant against. That was a slip against China. But yeah, Ukraine is another issue as well. Yeah.
So how does Ukraine overlap with this? I mean, in your other work, you've done a lot of work in terms of the environment, but this is clearly about oil, right?
Well, I mean, the specter of the Nord Stream 2 has certainly popped up, right? I mean, it seems that a lot of this is about LNG supply to Europe and who controls it. So certainly a fossil fuels fiasco in one sense. In another sense, there's a very real ideological effort on Putin's side to kind of flex the muscles of Great Russia or Greater Russia to unite what they call Russian speakers under a kind of sovereign blanket or sphere of influence, right? So he can tell his people that he's working to reclaim the glory of Greater Russia, and that actually wins him a lot of support away from
locally.
Away from a lot of the dissent over lockdowns that have been pretty harsh in Russia. In the West, I think Ukraine is significant for a number of reasons, obviously with regards to political geography and the fact that the United States and NATO in general seek to prevent the expansion of the Russian hegemony on the level that it was during the Soviet Union. But you're right, a lot of the reason for that lies in economic production rather than an ideological sort of affinity with freedom and democracy.
And of course, it's Putin's intent, as he said explicitly in multiple press conferences, even just yesterday, when he was there with Macron. His intent is to weaken and destabilize and maybe even break apart NATO, which of course is his who's holding him accountable. I mean, I understand that there's a lot of folks who rightfully so question NATO for a lot of mishandlings and I mean, yes, of course, like every institution basically out of last century is broken and not perfect.
Yeah.
Anything that neoliberals have touched. But to say that it shouldn't exist is like saying the UN shouldn't exist. Like,
it's a little bit of a, it's a tough spot, right? Because the existing framework is in a deadlock and nobody knows an appropriate way out. They only know all of the problems as they currently exist. So,
right.
It's one thing to contemplate innovative solutions and quite another to set them into place. And doing so during a period of diplomatic crisis, such
That's
as
right.
we're in, is perhaps reckless,
to say the least. Yeah. Really interesting. Okay, so what's likely to happen? I mean, if you see the far right continuing to grow, and obviously we have elections coming up this year, is this spreading or is it being contained? Like, where are we in terms of this far right? It's so hard to see with Ukraine right now and to see really how powerful is this real? Is it something, is Putin really succeeding at his strategy and working with the far right in the US to do so? Is it actually succeeding or failing? I'm very confused at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that really is the question. It's sort of anybody's game at this point. There are so many problems right now. The world is definitely in a crisis on this scale that I don't know if we've really experienced since the United States started the war in Iraq. And there are so many different things that could happen between now and the elections. So, it's not, I'm not pessimistic about the current situation, but I'm also, I wouldn't call myself an optimist at all. I think that, you talk about Bannon. I mean, their strategy has been kind of frighteningly successful thus far, of just sort of like attempting to take over election boards, of bullying teachers, of bullying doctors, and really kind of trying to assert their agenda, such as it is, even if all it really counts for is a kind of a power, grab. So, so I think the left needs a valid response that goes beyond a sort of, well, we're the ones who are trying to keep this country together, because that's nice and all. It's good behavior, but it's not necessarily going to win elections, right? So on the one hand, there are processes of accountability that are currently in place, right? We're talking about the arrest of significant oath keepers, the arrest of leading Proud Boys. Here in Portland, the jail sentence for the violent far right activist Alan Swinney. So there are, it would appear, consequences down the pipe. And if those consequences don't work out, if the January 6th committee basically, derails or simply falls flat, then we're going to be moving further and deeper into the crisis, because the only thing that reactionaries understand is consequence, and there just haven't been any.
I want to close with this because you may have seen that Mike Pence finally said something about the January 6th riots and terrorist attacks is what I'm calling them. He said something, and this is, I think a couple days after the RNC, the Republican Party, not only decided to side with the insurrectionists, but wants to censor both Representative Cheney and Kinzinger for basically defying their party and really, probing and investigating. Partly because, let's be clear, there were members of Congress who were in cooperation and communicating with those who were organizing on the outside in the riots.
Mhm.
So there's been a little bit of a showdown between Bannon and Mike Pence. Let's put that up there.
Said I had
There
to
we go.
overturn the election. President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president. Under the Constitution, I had no right to change the outcome of our election. And Kamala Harris will have no right to overturn the election when we beat them in 2024.
That's quite a pivot. Okay. And of course, Steve Bannon has a response.
Pence, you're gonna carry this thing eventually to your grave, okay? Because it is a mark of shame, and you are a stone cold coward. A stone cold coward. Boris Epstein. We're going to start with numbers and analysis, and then this thing broke this afternoon. My head's blown up. So Boris, you got to help me out here, brother. I can't take Pence, and I can't take Pence and Mark Short and all these Koch guys up there ratting out Trump up on Capitol Hill right now.
What?
I don't know.
Okay, I don't even care about Boris. Like, forget about that. So I have a theory on this. Only if a couple things happen. I think the Republicans who have been trying to keep their party alive are probably thinking this is a little bit too far, and that this is the kind of situation where even if Joe Biden doesn't do anything strategic on his campaign, which shocker he probably won't, and that the Senate Democrats and DCCC, they're not going to run the most strategic campaigns. It might be a wave because there are going to be so many normie Republicans, whatever those are, who are so disgusted by the fact that they're standing by the insurrectionists that it might turn in a different direction, which is why I just keep telling people, yo, just run at the local level. If you're a union member, if you're a woman, just run, because these are those kinds of years where a wave happens. Obviously, if you can run, if you're able to. I don't want to be, I want people to understand that it takes a lot of sacrifice. But if you're thinking about it, if you have the ability to, they need opponents, and the Democratic Party is doing so little to recruit, literally almost zero, that some school bill members that are insurrectionists might get in there because they don't have opposition. So if you just run, and if you can afford to do an ad showing the Republican Party, backing the insurrectionists, it's going to backfire. That's my theory, because this is ridiculous. This is Pence, trying to preserve maybe his political future, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right. I absolutely. I don't know what Pence's motivation is. Maybe he is trying to preserve his own political future in a field that he sees changing in in the direction that you're talking about, right? So it could be a good sign in that sense. On the other hand, he's speaking to the Federalist Society. He could just be vaunting himself and sort of patting himself on the back for his own decision, which fine. I mean, he was the one who put the nail in the coffin of Trump's plan, regardless of his efforts to bring in everybody from Homeland Security to the NSA to whoever. At the same time, I see the far right getting together and trying to do a trucker caravan here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So Bannon's 100% behind this. Fox News is already starting to promote it. So, it seems like that is likely planned for sometime in March. So that could have kind of a pretty big impact on people's perceptions of where the GOP stands. We'll see what the truckers get up to.
Hopefully there's some leftist truckers out there who remind their colleagues that, the masks aren't the enemies. And by the way, they might not even, the pandemic that might not even be a thing anymore. I'm knock on wood, I shouldn't say that. But but it's actually like your wages and your long hours. And so maybe think about unionizing instead. Yeah,
Hey,
I don't know. We'll see.
there's power in the union.
There is. It's always our weapon, right? Fascinating conversation. This isn't going away anytime soon, so I'd love to have you back on. Always good to speak to the expert on the far right and how they're organizing and strategizing and where they're going. Alexander Reed Ross, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nomiki. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, enjoy your Sharknado coffee.
Yeah, cheers.
All right, take care. And to everybody else, we have some shout outs to do before we wrap up today. We have some new patrons. Craig Z, thank you. Eric M, John A, and Carlos C. Love this energy. Thank you for joining us, patrons. And some super chats. Let me, if I can read this. Big Olameo. Thank you so much for your incredibly kind contribution. Says, the days are getting worse. Glad that Nomi, David, and Ben are here to keep me from sliding into the despair abyss. Thanks, guys. Left is best. Indeed it is. And Gabe, thank you for your love. And on Twitch, we've got Platinum Ninja. Thanks for joining. Oh gosh, I can't see. It's my glasses, guys. I'm getting old, okay? Umar H. Sories, thank you. You've been subscribed for 6 whole months. Really grateful to you. And Nug Wrangler resubscribed, been subscribed for 13 months. We know you, Nug Wrangler. And then Pagan Communist resubscribed. Thank you so much. It's been a year. Platinum Ninja cheered 100 bits. Thank you. And Bad Bunny. What's up, Bad Bunny, rating us? Thank you, Bad Bunny. We love you. Love to everybody else for joining us. If you're not a patron already, this is where we support each other. It's a hard world out there for independent leftist media, and people ask, like, how are you able to produce this show? Someone asked in our comments the other day, and it's because of our patrons. And really, the ecosystem has changed a lot since the Trump election, but our patrons have really kept the show going, and we have an incredible patron community. We are so grateful for your support. If you used to be a patron, if you had a cutback, please email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We will find a way to make it work. If you can afford to go to a higher level, that helps pay for the other patrons who may have to take some time off. Super grateful. We start, let's scroll that screen back up. We start at $5 a month. And then you can go all the way up and you get, swag, whether it's stickers, mugs, a tote bag. You get special patron privileges and interviews. So thank you to everybody. Go check us out at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. And we will see you on Friday for Femme Friday. Stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.